Hi everyone, you're welcome back to my channel. My name is Nancy, and if you're new to my channel, kindly subscribe, share and like my videos, and also put on your notification bell to be notified when I upload new tutorials. This is a requested tutorial on how to make a plain and pattern casual dress. And these are the measurements I'll be working with. This is the shoulder measurement, the bust measurement, the waist measurement, the hip measurement, the armhole circumference, and the full length of the gown, which is 38 inches. So let's get started. The first step is to mark the starting line. The next line is the bust line. The bust line is gotten by dividing the armhole circumference into 2. The armhole circumference is 16 inches. I divided it into 2 and that gave me 8 inches. The next line is the waistline, which is 15.5 inches. The next line is the hip line, which is 25 inches. And the next line is the full length of the dress, which is 38 inches. So I'm just going to mark 38 inches here, then add 1.5 inches sewing allowance to the hem to make it 39.5 inches. So this is the shoulder line, the bust line, the waist line, the hip line, and the full length of the dress. Alright, so before going further, remember that this is a plain and pattern dress, and the best way to achieve this cut is to mark ½ inch from the center fold. So you can easily get the center seam line that separates both fabric. So you need to mark ½ inch distance from this side of the folded fabric, starting from the shoulder line down to the full length of the dress as shown. So every measurement I'll be placing will be starting from this new vertical ½ inch line I marked. The next step is to mark the neck width. The neck width I'll be working with is 3.5 inches, starting from this new vertical line. And the neck depth I'll be working with is just 2 inches. So the reason I'm using 2 inches is because it's a plain and pattern fabric, and I do not want to make a mistake by cutting the neckline first, the exact neckline first. So I'll just be doing that when I have both my plain and pattern fabric already. Now I'll connect these 2 points together to form a curved neckline. The next step is to place the tape on the shoulder line to mark the shoulder measurement. The shoulder measurement is 14 inches divided by 2, which is 7 inches, plus ½ inch sewing allowance, and that is 7.5 inches. Now on this 7.5 inches point, I'll mark 1 inch below that point to connect this point to the neck width, and this will form the shoulder slope of the dress. Now I'll extend this point vertically downwards to the bust line so we can easily get the armhole curve. The next step is to place your tape on this new vertical line to mark the midpoint. Then you connect it to the bust line as shown, and this is the armhole curve for the dress. After this, the next step is to place the measuring tape on the bust line to mark the bust circumference divided by 4 plus 3 inches sewing allowance to the side, since it isn't a fitted dress. Now I'll also place my tape on the waistline to place the waist circumference divided by 4 plus 3 inches sewing allowance to the side. Then on the hip line, I'll place the hip circumference divided by 4 plus 3 inches sewing allowance to the side to connect that point to the waist point as shown. Then to get the wideness of the hem, all you have to do is just to place your tape on the hip line to take the measurement of the hip with the sewing allowance included, which is 12.5 inches. Now I placed my tape on the hem line to mark 12.5 inches, and I added extra 3 inches to the side to connect this point to the hip points as shown, so it can give me an A-line shape. The next step is to work on the edges of the hem so it doesn't give you a sharp edges. Now I placed my tape vertically above the hem line to mark 1 inch, and I placed my tape horizontally on the hem line to mark 3 inches to connect the 2 points together. So after sewing, you don't have this extra fabric popping out. The next step is to add half-inch sewing allowance to the top of the shoulder slope. The next step is to take out the extra fabric at the sides of the markings. And since there is a center seam on this dress, we need to slit the center fold open as shown. So this is the printed fabric I'll be working with. I folded the fabric into two, and the next step is to place the plain fabric on it as shown. After placing the plain fabric on the printed fabric, the next step is to trim out exactly the same shape from the printed fabric as shown. And you should also slit the center fold of the printed fabric open. So you should have two pieces of the plain fabric and two pieces of the printed fabric. Now I'll show you how this is going to be arranged. So this is one side of the printed fabric. I'm going to place one side of the plain fabric. Please take note that this is the right side of the fabric so that you don't make mistakes. Please kindly pay attention here. If you want the white plain fabric to be on the right side of your front piece, then you should make use of this particular part as the front piece. But if you want the white piece to be on the left side of your front piece, then you should make use of this combination. Alright, since I want the white piece to be on the left side of my front piece, then I'll be making use of this combination. The next step is to place both fabric on each other, right side to right side. Now I need to make a new neckline for the front piece. I placed my tape from the top of the shoulder slope to mark a neck depth of 4 inches. I'm so sorry I missed this clip, but I'll try my possible best to explain it. So I cut the neckline already, but I'll show you how this is done. Since I said I used the neck depth of 4 inches, I connected the neck depth to the neck width to give me a curved neckline. Then I trimmed out the neck depth as shown. The next step is on getting the neck slit. So I placed my tape from the center fold, starting from the neck depth down to 4 inches. And I also went ahead to place my tape horizontally on this 4 inches point to mark ½ inch at the top and ½ inch at the bottom of the 4 inches line, then to trim out as shown. So this is how the neck measurement was taken. So let's go ahead to stitch the fabrics together. So I'll start my stitches from that point straight down to the hem by ½ inch. After I made the center seam, the next step is to make the facing for the neckline. So I folded this fabric into two. Then I placed the front piece, which is on fold, directly on it as shown. Since there's a center seam on the front piece, all you have to do is to make sure that the seam allowance is a little bit outward from the main folded fabric. You can just use the stitches to make sure that it is well aligned. If you don't take note of this and you just cut the facing that way, you'll find out that the facing is wider than the neckline on the dress. I went ahead to trim out the round neck part, and at the top, which is the shoulder slope, I'll mark about 2.5 inches. So I just use my scissors to cut about 2.5 inches. Now for the slits, I'm just going to open it up so I get to the end of the slits on the main fabric itself. Now I'll place the starting of my tape on the end of the slit to mark 2.5 inches downwards, then connect it to the other 2.5 inches I marked on the shoulder slope. And this is the facing for the front piece of the neckline. The next step is to open up the right side of the front piece, then you place the right side of the facing directly on it. To secure the facing, you need to stitch it on the neckline, and this is done by following the direction of my finger. And when you get to this sharp edge, you raise the machine footer up before securing the side. After securing the facing, I took this to the overlocking machine to also weave the edges of the facing. The next step is to make the patch pocket that will be placed on the plain fabric. For the patch pocket, I'll be making use of the printed fabric. The width of the pocket is 10 inches, while the length of the pocket is 12 inches. And this will be used as a standard pocket measurement for this style. To secure the patch pocket, the first step is to fold the top of the pocket in by ½ inch. Then you further fold it in by ½ inch to secure the edges of the fold with a straight stitch. After I secure the top side of the pocket, which is the pocket opening, the next step is to fold the sides of the pocket in by ½ inch. But this time you won't be securing these folded sides. All you have to do is to use a pressing iron to press it flat so it gives you a line which will guide you in securing the patch pockets on the main dress. After folding the sides of the pocket, the next step is to fold the bottom of the pocket in by ½ inch. Alright, I've folded all sides of the pocket and the bottom of the pocket. The next step is to place the patch pocket on the plain side of the front piece as shown. On the thumbnail, it is obvious that the pocket was placed in a slant manner, so we'll be doing the same here. To place the pocket, you need to take some measurements. I placed my tape starting from the shoulder slope, and the half length of this client is 15.5, so I added about 3.5 inches, which made it 18.5 inches. And the essence of taking this measurement is to avoid the pocket from being too high or too low. I'll go ahead to pin the sides of the pocket and the bottom of the pocket. After pinning the pockets, I'll take this to the sewing machine to secure the sides of the pocket by following the direction of my finger. And this top part of the pocket won't be secured because it's the pocket opening. Alright, I've secured the pocket, and this is all for the front piece. On the back piece, the first step is to secure the center line seam, and this will be done starting from the neck depth down to the hem of the dress. So this is how it should be after you've secured the center seam. The next step is to use a bias tape to secure the neckline of the back piece. Since the neckline for the back piece is secured, the next step is to place the front piece of the dress on the back piece of the dress to secure the shoulders together. Here I'll be showing you the best and the neatest way to secure the shoulders together when there is a facing attached to the front piece. The first thing to do is to fold just the facing to the opposite side of the back piece as shown. So this facing should cover the shoulder of the back piece as shown. Now you should pin this together. For the other shoulder, I'll be working with the same folding process. So I place the shoulder of the back piece on the center line between the facing and the shoulder of the front piece as shown. After which I flipped the facing to the back piece of the shoulder. Now I'll take this to the sewing machine to secure both shoulders together. With this method, you'll see that the facing covered the starting of the shoulder seam. Alright, the next step is to secure the sides of the dress by 1 inch all through. After securing the sides of the dress, you should turn this to the right side of the fabric. The next step is to cut out the sleeve. Before doing that, you need to know the measurements of the armhole you have on the dress. So here I have 9 inches. I want one side of the sleeve to be the plain fabric, so I folded the plain fabric into 2. The next step is to place the starting line of the sleeve length. From the starting line, the sleeve length is 8 inches. I added 1.5 inches sewing allowance to that, which made it 9.5 inches. The next horizontal line I'll be marking is the cap sleeve line, which is 4 inches. Now on the cap sleeve line, since I measured the armhole of the dress to be 9 inches, I'll place 9 inches on the cap sleeve line and 1 inch sewing allowance to the side to connect this point to the tip of the starting line in form of a slant line as shown. The next step is to place your tape on this slant line to get the midpoint. Now I'll connect the midpoint above the slant line to the tip of the starting line, and then I'll go ahead to connect the midpoint below the slant line to the tip of the cap sleeve measurements. The round sleeve measurement, which will be placed on the sleeve length, is 12 inches, so I divided by 2, which made it 6 inches. And since I don't want it to be too tight, I added 1.5 inches sewing allowance to the side to connect it to the cap sleeve measurements as shown. And since we are not using a lining to turn the sleeve, you need to add about ½ inch to this side of the sleeve, then you connect it in form of a triangle as shown. Now I'll trim this out. Now we have a single sleeve. You should place this on the printed fabric to cut out the second sleeve. The next step is to fold the hem of the sleeve in by ½ inch and further folding it in by ½ inch to secure the edges of the fold, and you should repeat the same sewing process for the printed sleeve. And after I secured the sleeve opening, I folded the sleeve into 2 to secure the sides of the sleeve by 1 inch. After securing the sides of the sleeve, I turned it to the right side of the fabric. The next step is to attach both sleeves to the armhole of the dress by ½ inch. The final step is to secure the hem of the dress by folding it in ½ inch and further folding it in by ½ inch all through the hem. Alright guys, thanks for watching to the very end. I really do appreciate, and I hope this tutorial was helpful. If you are new to my channel, kindly subscribe, share and like my videos, and also put the notification bell to be notified when I upload new tutorials.